Hello everyone, it's Miss Angela from the Fort Worth Public Library. Welcome back to another Fort Worth Nature Center Discovery Club Storytime. Today we are talking about prairies. Prairies are grasslands where there aren't a lot of trees. And one cool thing about prairies is prairie dogs live there. I got to see some prairie dogs a few months ago when I went to Caprock Canyon. I had a lot of fun watching them. This is a prairie dog. They look a little bit like squirrels, but they live in burrows in the ground, and when they get scared, they run back to their holes and disappear. What do you think a prairie dog might be scared of? Our song today is about prairie dog burrows, and it's based on a poem called Prairie Dog Town by Mary Austin. We're going to sing it to the tune of Oh Susanna. I'll sing it one time, then you sing along with me the second time. You ready? Old Peter Prairie Dog builds him a house in Prairie Dog Town, with a door that goes down and down and down, and a hall that goes under and under, where you can't see the lightning, you can't hear the thunder, for they don't like thunder in Prairie Dog Town. Did you hear what scares a prairie dog? Lightning and thunder. That's right. Are you scared of lightning and thunder? Sometimes they can be scary. Let's sing it again. Old Peter Prairie Dog builds him a house in Prairie Dog Town, with a door that goes down and down and down, and a hall that goes under and under, where you can't see the lightning, you can't hear the thunder, for they don't like thunder in Prairie Dog Town. Great job, everyone! Our story today is about a very special prairie dog, and it's based on a true story. In 1803, Thomas Jefferson was the President of the United States. The country was still new, and President Jefferson had just made the Louisiana Purchase, and he wanted someone to explore this new territory out west. He asked his friends Lewis and Clark to go on the journey. Please explore the land and the rivers, make maps, collect plants, and draw animals that you see. Since I cannot come with you, please send interesting things you find back to me, so I can experience some of the West too. We will, said Lewis and Clark. It was going to be a long trip, so Lewis and Clark packed up lots of supplies and asked other explorers to go with them. One of the explorers was a Lemhi Shoshone woman named Sacagawea. She showed Lewis and Clark which plants were safe to eat and was the ambassador when the expedition met Native Americans. As the group traveled west, they saw things that they had never seen before. As the president had asked, they drew maps, collected plants, and drew animals. For the first time in their lives, they saw bison, grizzly bears, and jackrabbits. They wanted to send an animal to the president, but none of these would do. The bison were too big. The grizzly bears were too dangerous. And the jackrabbits were just too fast. We'll think of something, they said. One day when they were traveling through what is now Nebraska, they came to a prairie, and the ground was filled with holes, and by each hole sat a little animal. What are those? Lewis asked. Let's catch one, Clark said. They are small enough to send to the president. As the group got closer, the little animals barked and dove down into their holes. Everyone grabbed a shovel, and they started to dig. They dug and dug, but the little animals were too fast and their holes were too deep. How do we get them out? Clark asked. Let's try pouring water in one of the holes, Lewis answered. So they brought buckets of water and poured them down into one of the holes. Glug, 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 glug. They waited and waited, and finally one of the animals popped up from another one of the holes. I've got one, said Clark. He put the animal into a cage. What is it? Asked Lewis. A ground rat. I think it looks more like a squirrel, said Clark. A barking squirrel. Squirrels don't bark, said one of the other explorers. Dogs bark. We should call it a prairie dog. Yes, Lewis and Clark agreed. The explorers loved the little prairie dog and kept it as a pet all through the summer. The prairie dog loved having company and liked having the new foods that the explorers gave him, especially cookies. But in the spring, it was time to send some gifts to the president. The explorers had packed up the maps they had drawn, the plants that they collected, and the animal horns and bones they had found, and the prairie dog. They picked one of the explorers to take all of the packages on a boat down the Mississippi River to St. Louis. From St. Louis, the prairie dog and the other gifts were sent onto a boat and down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. In New Orleans, the prairie dog got sick. Choo! But the governor loved the little animal and nursed it back to health. Then the gifts went onto another ship from New Orleans, and it sailed around Florida and up to Baltimore. The last leg of the journey was a wagon that took the prairie dog from Baltimore to the White House. When the president saw the prairie dog, he said, "What is this? A gopher? A woodchuck? A squirrel?" Then he read the letter that came with the presents from Lewis and Clark. "The small animal is from the western prairie. It lives in holes and barks like a dog. We named it a prairie dog. It really likes cookies." The president brought a cookie, and the prairie dog chomped it down. The president laughed. "Americans will want to see this little fellow," he said. "I will send these fine presents to Mr. Peel's museum." The prairie dog had already traveled more than 4,000 miles, but he took one last journey to Philadelphia, which became his home. He lived in Mr. Peel's museum, where visitors could come and see this curious creature from the prairie. Mr. Peel was very happy. He wrote a letter to President Jefferson to say thank you. He wrote that the prairie dog is a handsome little animal, smaller and much more gentle than a woodchuck. But you have to keep an eye on your cookies. The end. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's time to pass it over to Mr. Michael from the Nature Center to tell you more about prairies. See you next time.
Good morning, everyone. This is Michael Perez with the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge. I want to welcome you to another edition of Discovery Club. Now, we're going to continue with that theme that we have scheduled for February, and that is habitats. We talked about the forests last week. Well, now we're going to talk about a different habitat, which is the prairie. But before I do that, I want to thank Miss Angela at the Fort Worth Public Library for your wonderful story time. And this Discovery Club could not happen without you and our friends at the Fort Worth Public Library. So thank you very much, Miss Angela, and all those behind putting the video together and so forth. So we're going to talk about the prairie habitat. All right. First of all, what is a prairie? And before we even define what a prairie is, you may look at this and it's like, Mr. Michael, it's just a bunch of grass. I got grass in my backyard. In fact, sometimes the grass gets really high. And I can attest to that, and I share your story. But this is a little different than your backyard. All the grasses here are native grasses that are used to provide a home, a shelter for wildlife. So that's what a prairie is. It's a grassland full of native grasses that are used to help animals, wildlife to survive. And they survive based on the types of grasses and the shelter that it provides. Okay? So as you can tell, I got my jacket on, I got my gloves on. It's a little cold outside. So you look at the prairie and think, how does a wild animal survive in the prairie habitat? It's open to wind. As you can see, the screen's kind of moving. I'm not moving. It's the screen because of a slight wind. And you think, well, what protection does an animal have here? And why would an animal live there versus the forest that has protection of the trees? Well, I'm going to tell you, okay? If you look at these tall grasses, now there are different types of prairies in Texas. We have tall grass prairies, short grass prairies, and so forth. Well, you have some tall grasses here and some short grasses. We have little blue stem, big blue stem, switchgrass, yellow Indian grass. These are all native plants, grasses that collect and form this prairie. So this prairie is important because of all the wildlife that utilize this prairie. And how do they utilize it, especially on a cold day like today? Well, right there, you see those tall grasses, the dark level right there, okay? Those are tall grasses. They're bunched together. And birds like native sparrows, like Lincoln sparrows and Harris's sparrows, also meadowlarks, they'll actually kind of get inside of those bundles. Just imagine your hand. Everybody put your hand up, okay? That's just a description or a demonstration of a bundle of prairie grass. Here's your grass. Okay, you'll make your grasses. Hey, if I'm doing it, you got to do it too. All right. So inside of, if I was to tip my grass over, you can see how it cups in, okay? So an animal can get in there and hide. And the tall grasses actually protect them from the elements such as wind, rain, and so forth. And in the summertime, same thing. How do they survive? Wildlife survive in a habitat like this? There's not a lot of protection from the sun. Well, same thing. They get inside. Go ahead, make your grass again. Make your tall grass. Go wispy. We're gonna go wispy. But they get in there, the animals, and they can hide, and they get shelter. They get the shade, and get away from the elements such as the sun in the summer, the wind, in the wintertime. So these tall grasses provide a home for all the wild animals, the native songbirds, the rabbits, even the herps, reptiles such as the snakes and things like that. Deer utilize this. They come out there and browse this particular area. You find them in the prairie in the morning time all the time. So it's a great home because those grasses, they bundle up together and provide protection from predators, but also saves them from the elements. So the prairie habitat is a very important habitat. It's not just a bunch of grass. It's not a bunch of grass. Now, the prairies also referred to as the underground forest. And what I mean by that is, last week we were talking about the forest. The forest is full of tall trees with relatively shallow root systems, okay? If you were to dig the ground, a tree, the roots go down relatively deep, right? But they're shallow when it comes to a prairie grass. So the height of that plant is above the ground, and then the shallow roots are below ground. Well, it's the opposite for a prairie. Prairie has, tall grasses, okay? Yeah, some tall grasses, some short grasses, but the root systems are way deep under the soil. They can go 10, 15, 20 feet below or more, and that's important. And the reason why it's important because all the soil that's here stays intact. When you have a root system that goes really deep underground, it holds all the soil together. So when wind comes or rain comes, the little soil particles, they're not going to be eroding away. Oh no, sir. They're going to stay together. And that's important because it keeps all the soil here and it allows for all the plants to stay put as well. So these plants here were the prairies referred to as the underground forest. Okay, so it's the opposite. The height or length, if you will, is underground, and the short part is above the ground. Opposite of the forest. Now, it's home to wildlife. It provides food for wildlife, like all the ones we mentioned. It provides shelter. Okay, but how is it beneficial to us? How is this good for us? Well, let me tell you. The root systems actually have ways to get rid of toxins or really bad things in the atmosphere or that go down in the water. It actually cleans. So as the water is coming down, it infiltrates underground. Those root systems can break down all the potential of bad stuff, and it purifies it. So these plants actually clean our water. Number two, they hold a lot of water. When you have all those roots going, 20, 30 feet or so below the surface, it allows that water to go down those root systems and takes it all the way down to become groundwater, where all that water is stored. That's important. So it saves our water. It cleans our water. The other thing that this prairie does as well is it provides the home for the wildlife, as I said. So it cleans the water, it purifies water, but also keeps all the soil intact. So that's beneficial to us, especially us who work with wildlife and are trying to protect a natural area. How do we take care of this land? So we understand that it cleans our water, it holds our water. So we want to do everything we can to protect it. How we do that? Well, let me tell you one way that we do this. And the one way, there's multiple ways, but the really most interesting way is we light it on fire. That's right. We light this on fire on purpose. We work a lot with individuals in the fire department and doing handling wildfires and so forth. They're training to do that, and we work alongside with them. And our natural resource manager, who does an excellent job, he creates these burn plans and it gets all the individuals on the same page and making sure all the safety procedures are in place and the elements. Like, we can't do it on really, really windy day or a hot summer day where the atmosphere may not be as, or the sky is not as clean, if we will. So you want to do like a winter day where the atmosphere is nice and clean and clear, because you're going to be letting a lot of smoke in the atmosphere. So if it's a hazardous situation, like we have our pollution, air pollution warnings and so forth in the summertime, we do it in the wintertime, not in the summer. So you combine all those things, you get all the right individuals who are skilled and trained, put all the safety procedures in place, find the right weather elements, not a very windy day, a very relatively dry, low humidity. You don't want the grass to be all wet, obviously you want it dry. We get all those things, all those recipes together, and we do what we call a prescribed burn. Now think about it, when you get sick, you go to the doctor to get better. And one of the ways that the doctor helps you get better is by diagnosing the problem and then sending you to the pharmacy to get a prescription to get better. Well, we identified this problem. Okay, we want a healthy prairie. We want healthy children, you, right? Me. So that's why we go to the doctor. Well, we want a healthy habitat. So we intervene here at the Nature Center. And we say, in order for this to be healthy, we have to introduce fire. Because fire, as it comes in, all the burnt material gets burned and all those nutrients go down into the soil, underground, that underground force, right? And then as the new grass is growing, all those nutrients make it even more nutritious and better for all the wildlife, like the deer that come browse. And after we do a burn here, a couple of days, you can start seeing these green forbs come in and the deer just nibbling on it. They're just like, oh, this tastes so good. So not only are we benefiting and helping the prairie, but we're also benefiting, helping wildlife. So we do a prescribed burn all across the Nature Center, and this is one of the spots that we do it. Now, the other thing about prescribed burn, there's a safety message in that too. Think about it. All these grasses, like in your backyard, when your tree, all the leaves from the tree fall down, they gather in your yard, you rake them up, right? You don't just leave them there. Same thing with these grasses. The grasses, they die off and fall down, and they collect. That's called litter. Okay, we'll call it litter. Or, well, we'll talk about it in a second. So all the leaf litter or the grass, it collects on the ground. And it can be dry. And say, for example, in the spring, we get a lightning strike, a storm comes in, lightning strikes, it ignites it. All that grass that is built up because it's fallen from the winter can go aflame and cause a potential wildfire across the Nature Center. So what we try to do is reduce reduce the litter, the grass on the ground, and prevent a wildfire by coming in here and safely, methodically, with the trained professionals and staff to get rid of all that grass. So now we burn it, and if a lightning strike comes, nothing's going to happen because there's no fuel load. We call it a fuel load. There's no fuel for that fire because it's already been burned as part of our prescribed burn. So that's how we help the habitat and also help the wildlife. All right, so real quickly recap, we talked about what a prairie is, a grassland. Here's an example of it. We talked about some of the animals that utilize, like deer, rabbits, songbirds, and so forth. We talked about how they utilize it by getting inside those big tall grasses to shelter it from the wind and the sun, depending on what the season is. So that's how they can survive in that type of habitat, this type of habitat. We talked about why this habitat is important. Cleans our water, helps us store water, helps prevent soil from being lost, which is called erosion. Okay, we talked about how it's an underground forest, how they have a network of long roots to do all those things I mentioned, like storing water and purifying water. And then lastly, I told you a little bit about some of the ways that one way that we here at the Nature Center take care of this prairie so that wildlife down the road have a nice habitat. Now, one thing I did not say that I want to reiterate, the reason why we prescribe a burn and the reason why we do a burn, and the reason why the burn is in place is to make it healthy. And one of the ways that it becomes unhealthy is if we do nothing. If you look all across there, you see those trees, okay, that tree line. If we did nothing over a long period of time, eventually all those trees are going to start growing this way, and they're going to take over this habitat. And all those songbirds, the deer, the snakes, the rabbits, and all those forms of wildlife that see this prairie as very beneficial and important for their livelihood is now gone. So that's why we have to prescribe fire. That's why we have to intervene, because we want to maintain this habitat so it cleans water, holds water, and provides homes for wildlife. Okay, so that's the big take-home message. We're trying to protect this and keep it in place for you to see, but also for wildlife. So it's a cold day, so I'm going to go ahead and end this Discovery Club. I want to thank you for joining me. You got to sit in your nice, comfy, warm house to watch this. I'm out in the cold. I'm like, I got to get inside. So thank you again for tuning in. And we're going to jump back in next month and do a couple more Discovery Clubs and help you appreciate nature, point you to nature and appreciating it, and to explore it. So, and I always say, get outside and explore nature. Get outside and just walk amongst the grass, underneath the tall trees of that forest. We talked about habitat this month. So take advantage of that prairie. Take advantage of that forest. Come visit us at the Nature Center so you can kind of see firsthand what this is like and what it looks like. All right, guys, stay warm and tune in next time for Discovery Club. This has been Michael Perez. Have a great time, guys. Hey, great weekend. Bye-bye.